All right, so we've got a few more people joining us here too. But I just wanted to, first of all, say thank you, Christine, for the wonderful talk, and welcome to our interview today. Welcome to everyone who's joined. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. I want to invite folks, as you're listening, if you come up with questions or comments, I want to invite you to type those in our public chat box. Christine and I will both keep an eye on those and try to pick up any questions or comments you have there. We'll also leave a little space at the end to just open up mics, and if people prefer to ask questions directly that way, we can field your questions there as well. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds because we seem to have people coming in at a pretty regular clip still. So give me just a few. We'll take a few more seconds here and see if others join us. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome, Christine. That talk, it occurs to me as I was watching it, was done a long time ago, it feels like now. And you might be on mute, Christine. I don't think I can hear you just yet.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
So yeah, that feels like that was done a long time ago now, back at the beginning of the year, in fact. So I'm wondering, do you have anything you want to add just off the top? A few things have happened since then. So I always give speakers this opportunity because sometimes you remember things that you want to add or other things have come up. But I think especially in this case, because it's been a little while, I just want to give you an opportunity if you have anything in particular that you want to add. And if not, we'll dig into what's there, which is plenty.
Yeah, it seems like it was forever ago. When I watched this, I was like, a lot of things came to my mind. But the biggest thing, when you watch yourself present, you go, oh, shoot. And my oh, shoot moment was when it came to the conversation around I gave 3 levels of engagement, and the last I said was active listening. And I really didn't want to use that phrase. I really wanted to use empathic listening. And there's a difference, and I know the difference. Active listening is just such one of those things that rolls off your tongue, and everybody's kind of used to saying, kind of like engagement. But empathic listening is different than active listening, and we'll probably, I don't know, maybe we'll get to that, or you want me to mention that now, or?
Sure, let's just jump. Yeah, let's just jump in now. Can you? That's a nuanced difference, I think, for someone who's not paying a real close attention to those terms or maybe hasn't had experience with them before. Can you say a little bit more what you mean about that and why you wish that you used empathic listening over the other?
Yes, I will. It sounds like it's a new phrase to those of us who are not in the psychotherapy field, but it's been around for a long time. Carl Rogers was the person who termed that, renowned psychotherapist, back in the 60s, I think it was. He passed away in 1987. But so it's been around for a long time, and I've looked at the differences between the two. And, the biggest thing is that you're listening for what people say and understanding their emotions and their feelings behind it, whereas with active listening, you're really listening to the words, and what can happen oftentimes is you hear that word that you were listening for, and then you start thinking, aha, I heard that word and what my response is. So you're not fully listening to what they're saying, and you're not fully getting the experience of understanding what their emotions are that are tied to those words. So I wanted to use that phrase in there, and I just didn't. But if you, again, my Google search, but Google search Carl Rogers, there's some YouTube videos. They're old. They're, when he was a professor back in the 60s. But they're really meaningful, and there's been a lot written about that since then, and you can look at just the difference between active listening and empathic listening to really understand what those nuances are. It's really something, a very high level to achieve, but I think people can get there. We're on a trajectory to get there with all of the things that we're doing right now, I think, in the field.
Do you have thoughts for people about how how to accelerate that? I mean, to me, that sounds, I think you're right. That's requires a high level of focus for one thing, and particularly in our world nowadays when things are virtual and there's lots of other stuff going on around us all the time. It seems like that's might be a challenging task to do. Do you have thoughts about if people wanted to think about how to do that better, what they might do?
Yeah, well, I do think it's a process, right? I think everybody's pretty much rolling out some form of trauma-informed training in their jurisdictions for legal and judicial professionals, and that's great. That's like step one, is understanding those principles, where people are coming from, starting to build that empathy that I talk about, and that's really very necessary to the engagement work. And then moving on to the authentic engagement piece, which is kind of a higher level. Okay, so I understand where they're coming from, but unless you really have kind of an interaction with them where they feel that trust coming from you, they feel that you're not judging them, so that they can open up to you and be a part of that conversation with you, then you're there. Then that's a really great place to be. And then if you feel like you're there, then you can take it another step higher and say, okay, but am I really listening to everything that they're saying in the way that they're saying it, and are we responding in the most appropriate way to benefit the family because I'm listening? And, the interesting thing about empathic listening is it's sort of like, the work on adaptive challenges is that a lot of times the result is that the person comes to the solution themselves. Now, I know in child welfare we give them lots of solutions, right? Or at least we give them lots of pathways to solutions. But what a great thing if the person themselves says, aha, this is really where I need to go and what I need to do. So in order to do that, I think it does start with the trauma-informed care training. And there's a lot of them out there. I know, in New York, I'm sure Trista Bora would be happy to share with you their curriculum, because they did one just for legal and judicial personnel, and oftentimes it's kind of a modified just version of what agencies get, but theirs were for legal and judicial. She's New York CIP. And then building from there, I looked to see whether, there's empathic listening training. I didn't find anything like that. I think it's more of an independent study, reading, thinking, and trying it out.
You have to do a little bit of work on yourself before you can jump in with this. I'm wondering, that makes me wonder about, you talk about in the beginning of your talk how one thing that might hold us back from behaving this way more frequently in court is just having some discomfort about what people will ask for, or not knowing whether or not you're actually really going to be able to help. Like, I think that's a fear that all of us, we're all in some form of a helping profession. That's kind of our brand, is to help people. And what if they ask for something that I can't do, or I don't know about, or I don't, how does that happen? And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that. Kind of how do we get over that? Are there things that we can do that can help us so that maybe that discomfort is lessened to a degree so that we're willing to at least try?
The discomfort is very real. I mean, most of, the people who are doing this, lawyers, judges, they're successful people. They're successful because a lot of times they are able to come up with solutions and answers to problems, right? And so it's a really different thing and a very vulnerable position to be in. I observed one judge who did it so very well. She regularly said, I don't have all the answers, and I'm not sure that I'm the one to come up with the solution, so together we're going to try to figure this out, even if it means something we've never heard of before. So I saw this judge, and I was like, wow, that's great. I mean, so I'd say try it on, put it out there, try it on at the beginning of a conversation so that, walls are down right from the beginning, or you can try it on later if it feels better to you, but try it on, however it works for you, but making yourself a little more vulnerable. And I think that'll go a long way toward authentic engagement as well, letting other people see your humanness.
It certainly opens the door to that empathy that you were talking about. I would think it's hard to be feeling like the person that you're talking to is particularly empathetic when they come at you with a list of solutions before you even said anything, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or being judged. I mean, that's one of the biggest fears that we hear is people feel like, okay, I'm sitting before somebody who's very successful, has their life together from what they see, or the people around me, and I don't, and here I am all by myself. So, that's a really important piece that that they don't feel judged in that space.
How did you balance that out when you mentioned that you were hearing cases and you had this kind of project that you were hearing cases under, and I'm curious because it strikes me that on the one hand, you say, well, people don't want to feel that they're being judged. On the other hand, they're talking to someone who's literally called a judge, right? So whose job is in many ways on certain kinds of things to pass judgment. How did you balance that out?
For me, I engaged in a very conversational style, whether it be with the children that were in my courtroom or the parents. And we were in a jurisdiction where the parents were allowed to speak directly to the judges. I know that's not the case everywhere, but if the attorney didn't want them to say something or I was approaching something that they were uncomfortable with, they shut it down. But for the most part, I welcomed people into my courtroom. Very first thing, hi, how are you today? It's nice to see you. And then told them why we were here, and then we were talking. And it just felt a little more natural, and I was supportive of them, very much like the treatment court model where you come in and you're applauded for your success. I made sure I always did that, let them feel that I was on their side because I really was. So I just tried to engage with them on a human level, not an elevated judge type of level.
Sounds to me like I remember in your talk, one of the things that you talked about was the idea of kind of tools and policies and things like that are a good start, but maybe not enough. So to me, it sounds like what you're saying is it's not just the what you do, but it's the kind of how you do it, or as I've talked with some people, it's how you be, when you're with other people. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the roles of those kinds of tools and policies and those kinds of things. Do you have to have those, I guess, even? Do those have to be in place in your jurisdiction, or is this something you can just kind of decide to do on your own?
I think oftentimes they're necessary. I think what we want a lot of times to see is a coordinated response. We don't want, huge variation from caseworker to caseworker. We don't want huge variation from attorney to attorney. Now, we know we have it. We know that happens, but these policies, these bench cards, protocols, they at least give people a sense of what the parameters are. And yeah, they're the tools, and the how you execute them is really important. But I also would say if you're the recipient of a tool, that you take a minute and spend with yourself and say, why is the tool being put in place? Before the how am I going to implement it, understand why it's there, right? There's an underlying reason, and it's not just because everybody likes to legislate us or they want to tell us what to do or how to do it, right? Think about the underneath of that tool as to why it's being put in place, and then think about how to best implement it so that you are supporting that why.
Right. So I hear you get one of my favorite topics, of course, is talking about intention, right? Getting clear on why you're doing it and what it is that why the tool was created. You talked a lot about the idea of authentic engagement, and I know for some folks listening, I know at least when I first started hearing that term, I'm like, what does that really mean? Like, is that like engagement plus? Is that like, what differentiates authentic engagement from, like, I don't know, is there non-authentic engagement or just the plain version? Like, could you talk a little bit about when you use that term, what does that mean in our context?
Yeah, I will. And I do think there's levels of engagement, right? You can do what's required of you, and you've checked the boxes because you had the meeting, where you had people in front of you, and you did the thing. And so that's, technically engaging. Authentic engagement is really getting one-on-one with somebody, is making them feel. It's not about you. It's how you've made them feel. So if you've made somebody else feel comfortable, somebody else feel that you are trustworthy, somebody else feel that they can rely on you and talk to you and help, that you can help them, then you're authentically engaging. And, I think I said in there that, it's a buzzword right now, engagement. And so many of the states and so many tips talk about engagement, that I think it's just this word that's kind of going up here now, that like, oh yeah, we know that. We all know that we need to engage. I actually like the work that you can, if you Google and look under authentic engagement in education. In the education system, between students and faculty, there's a lot of really interesting things that I think we can extrapolate. And I would encourage you to do that, because even when I was looking and saying, okay, authentic engagement, child welfare, I kind of got that glaze, like, yeah, heard that, done that, been there, yep, we all agree that's what should happen. But when you think about it from another system's perspective and say, how can I take that into my system and use some of that, it really makes you think more about it rather than it just being glossed over. So, yeah, I like the work. Although I will say that the work more in the education system, and all of these build on each other, right? The trauma-informed care, and then authentic engagement and empathic listening, they all like overlap with each other. The education system and the authentic engagement do talk about the faculty having some solutions outlined. So you kind of need to temper that a little bit, and you have to manage them all together and think about how they intersect, and maybe if they're in conflict, what's the most important principle to rise above the conflict.
Can you talk just a little bit about that? Because that was one of the things I took away from your talk too, these kind of three concepts of authentic engagement, and you spoke about that in the context of empathy, and I think you said a deep understanding of trauma. Can you talk about how kind of those three pieces, how do you see those kind of working together or overlapping, or what's that about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think they're building blocks. I really do. I think the basic understanding of trauma starts to get at that empathetic piece with an understanding of it. But then authentic engagement really brings you one step up and above that to say, okay, I may understand their trauma, but can I understand it in a way so that I'm talking to them in a way that reflects my understanding of their trauma? And then again, the empathetic listening is that highest level, building on all of those and saying, okay, now can I actually hear them in a way that will help them most?
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful to see how those, yeah, I think so. I think it's helpful to see how those things, because I hear a lot about each of those things kind of in their own right sometimes, and sometimes they overlap, and sometimes they're in different discussions. Yeah. Do you have resources for, oh, go ahead.
Let me just say this. One of the hallmarks of the empathic listening is, and this is again in conflict with the way that we operate in the courts, right, is that you have to allow enough time to listen without prescription as to what that is. And they talked about it in one of the articles that I've read, talks about it in the way of a dam, that these people are coming with so much pent-up emotion and things to the situation at hand that when they're given the opportunity to let it go with somebody that's really just listening, not peppering with questions, not, listening, that dam just lets go. And it's when the water equalizes when they can actually move forward. And so sometimes it takes some time for them to let go and for that water to equalize so that you can have meaningful conversations around that. And that's really tough when we have really crowded calendars and dockets and trying to fit that, into the day and still do the good work. But so it is challenging.
Yeah, I'm curious if you have thoughts about how to deal with that. I mean, because I hear time pressure, time famine kind of being an issue all the time in courts. The other thing, when you said that makes me think of is the scope of what's talked about in a hearing, right? Because that's very different than in, for instance, a therapeutic session or even as an educator. There may be reasons why maybe even that person's own attorney wants the scope of what they're talking about limited down, or the court, wants to hear information but needs, again, has a docket and wants information that's quote unquote relevant to the findings that they have to make. Do you have thoughts about how to balance those things out?
It's really hard. I mean, calendar management is one of those things that's very challenging. Having worked in the court system, not just as a referee, but other administrative aspects, you try to balance those. Different jurisdictions have examined what types of cases take longer. Ideally, to understand that somebody's at a high emotional type of situation, and they might be like at this breaking point, and they might come into court with that before you can talk to them, and you might need to let them get it off their chest. That would be great to know that we can, we'll schedule that for another 15 minutes. But I don't really know how to go about doing that. It's challenging. Calendar management is just challenging, let alone trying to find time to add this type of really empathic listening on top.
Great. I'm wondering, so most of what we've talked about here to me seems to be largely centered on the individual level. I mean, by definition, right? If we're being empathetic listeners and we're authentically engaging someone, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about this kind of on a systemic transformation level. I know you, as part of the CFSR unit, working in there, you're always working on these system level issues. And what you're talking about here sounds to me to be very individual and very genuine between two human beings. Have you seen things that you think help to support or drive those individual relationships that are happening on that systemic level?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the systemic work is the foundation to all of this. It is, the jumping off point. You mentioned, how do the tools, are they still necessary? I do think that they're necessary, and that's the systemic piece, really, to put in the policies that support the good practice, to put in bench cards when you know that certain things need to be addressed on a regular basis that may be missed. All of those pieces are really, those are the systemic functioning pieces. So that, a lot of the PIPs talked about, not a lot, some of them have trauma training actually in the program improvement plans. And whenever there was a training strategy in a program improvement plan, the question was, great, and then what, right? So those things are important, and it is the policy pieces, the tools that are the systemic pieces. And then, sure, you can support individual functioning beyond that, but it takes a lot of support, maybe peer mentoring, kind of individual TA for those people who are willing to do that. Maybe somebody's going to decide that they want to do an academy around that for interested people in a certain role that want to do things differently and get to this higher level of engagement. I think that would be great. You could conceivably draft a strategy around that type of functioning as well.
Great, thank you. I want to just open up. We've got a few more minutes here. I want to just open up if there's anyone who has a question. I'm going to invite you. You can type that in the chat. You can also ask that question out loud by unmuting yourself or raising your hand. There's a little icon at the top that lets you raise your hand. So I want to give just a couple minutes if folks have questions. I see that Kristen from Wisconsin is typing something in. And Kristen, you can continue to type, or we can unmute you and just let you ask whatever you prefer. Any particular engagement resources, such as bench cards or things like that, that you would recommend for judicial officers?
So a lot of the bench cards that are being drafted now are being drafted with the research in mind that I mentioned in my talk, that the engagement strategies are yielding better outcomes. So they're reminders for judges to do things like call people by their names, ask if they have any questions, explain proceedings to them. So I'm not sure that there's a specific engagement bench card, but I think you can certainly talk to your CBCC liaison, and they will be able to hook you up with a bunch of the newer bench cards that have that engagement piece in it, Kristen.
Thank you. Other questions? Again, you can type in the chat or you can ask direct or raise your hand. Sully typing. Give it a minute. While we're waiting for Sully's question to come in, Christine, do you have anything else that you wanted to add for folks? As we're kind of coming up on our time limit here, so I want to make space if there were things that we talked about or other things that came to mind for you that you'd like to share with folks.
I'll just soapbox for a really quick minute. Underlying that, or maybe not so underlying in my video, was kind of a plea that no matter kind of what your role is, if you can help get away from the cookie cutter services, the menu of services that gets put forth, and support very targeted conversations about needs for the family, that would be wonderful. If we can find ways to roll that out more broadly, I think across our system, we'll be in a definitely better place for supporting families.
Great. So Sully's question, there's two parts to it. One is, how do issues of race, age, or gender, how do you see those factoring in here? And then the second part of that, in my mind at least anyway, is somewhat equated with that as well, which is in terms of kind of experience level of folks. Do you have thoughts about how that might impact authentic engagement or people's ability to do that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a constant, a constant learning, both for people who are at the higher level, but for new people that come in. We can't forget, especially as systems change agents, like, oh, we did that trauma training, right? So everybody should be good with trauma. There's a whole new batch of attorneys that are coming in. There's new judges to the bench. There's new caseworkers that walk through the door. We have to be mindful that these people need to start doing those levels as well with the engagement tools. So I think that is very, very important. There's always issues of race and gender and age. There's some really good information out there on authentic engagement with older youth. There's a lot of really good tools around that, but I think some of that can be largely extrapolated to everybody else. Trauma is a lot about the feelings and underneath that, so you have to bring in the cultural competence, the race issues, all of that to the conversation as well, and you have to be make yourself a student of all of those issues as well if you're going to be the most effective at engaging each unique person that walks through your door, no matter what that door is, a courtroom door or, your law office or the caseworker.
Or the Zoom waiting room, as it seems to be in our current time. Great, thank you. All right, well, I think we are about time here. So thank you, Christine, both for the wonderful talk and also for giving even more of your time to us here for this interview. I appreciate it. I know a lot of the folks on the line here have seen you out and about as part of their PIP and know where to connect with you, so we thank you for that as well. As you said, if folks have questions or would like help getting resources or things like that, they can always contact their CVCC liaison. So I just wanted to say thank you to you and to everyone who's appeared. Thank you to Adria and Stephanie, our tech support hosts from NCJ, FCJ, for making this go nice and smoothly for all of us so that we had a nice clear line to hear everyone and get to see the video. And have a good rest of your day. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.